ever fall head over heels for someone.
Yeah.
Like really hard and fast.
Oh, yeah.
Now imagine marrying that person just 13 days after meeting them.
Wow. That's quick.
Sounds kind of like a fairy tale at first,
It
right?
does.
But what if that fairy tale, what if it turned into a total nightmare,
Yeah.
ending with you accused of their murder?
Oh, okay, yeah. That takes a dark turn.
That's the story we're diving into today. It's the case of Ashley Benfield.
This is a case that, really grabbed headlines, sparked debates all over. We're talking whirlwind romance, accusations of abuse, a ballet company, and then a fatal shooting. Everyone is asking, was it self-defense? Or was this something else?
We're going to try to untangle this whole thing, piece together what we can. We've got court testimonies. We've even got Ashley's own reenactment of the shooting.
Oh, wow.
So our mission today is to figure out what led to that day.
And, what really gets me about this case is, well, it brings up all these tough questions about domestic abuse, toxic relationships. And, how do you even know what's really true when it's hard to tell who's the victim and who's not?
Right. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. Ashley and Doug Benfield, their love story starts in a pretty unusual place. A political event.
Mm-hmm.
At Ben Carson's house, actually.
Really?
Yeah, and they connect over shared values, faith, Second Amendment rights, and their chemistry, well, it was undeniable.
I mean, from what I've read, they were just, instantly smitten.
Yeah, but then the speed of it all, it's crazy. They went from meeting to saying, I love you in, a week, and then they get married just 13 days later.
13 days.
13 days.
That's intense. I mean, think about all the relationships we know that took, months, years to develop.
Totally. But to understand this better, I think we need to look at their backgrounds. Ashley, she was a ballerina, a model. She even claimed to have worked on Donald Trump's 2016 campaign.
Interesting. So she's got this kind of this driven personality, right?
Yeah, and Doug, he was a former Navy pilot, an intelligence officer. Get this, he was a self-proclaimed quantum physics expert, and then he became an entrepreneur.
Okay, so a high achiever, too.
And there's another layer here. Doug was a recent widower. His first wife, Renee, she died from a heart condition just 9 months before he met Ashley.
Oh, wow. So both of them were dealing with some heavy stuff.
Exactly. It almost feels like they were both looking for someone to rescue them. Ashley, she confided in Doug about her difficult past, and Doug, well, he was grieving, raising his teenage daughter, Eva, all on his own.
That whole rescuer and damsel in distress dynamic, that can be tricky. It can throw off the balance in a relationship.
Totally. And it can also, mask some red flags that you might normally see.
Mm.
Speaking of red flags, the relationship between Ashley and Eva, Doug's daughter, well, it was strained right from the start.
Yeah, that's not uncommon in blended families.
Right. But in this case, it was pretty bad. Ashley seemed to see Eva as competition for Doug's attention. She even read Eva's diary.
Whoa, that's crossing a line. Imagine being a teenager, grieving your mom, and then this new woman comes in, she's barely older than you, and she's reading your diary.
Yeah, talk about tension. And then there's Doug himself. He had some anger issues. There were reports that he'd punched a hole in the wall and even fired a gun into the ceiling during fights with Ashley.
Okay, so we've got some volatile personalities here. It's a charged atmosphere.
Definitely. And right in the middle of all this, they decide to start their dream project, a ballet company.
A ballet company?
Yeah, it's supposed to be this really inclusive space, celebrating diversity, challenging those old school ballet traditions. They said they had a budget of $2.5 million.
Wow, they were going all in.
Big time. Their company, A&B, it launched with all this fanfare. They were recruiting dancers from all over the world, promising contracts, insurance, visas, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds impressive. But I'm guessing things didn't quite go as planned.
Not exactly. Cracks started to show pretty quickly. Dancers weren't getting paid. There were layoffs. And Ashley, well, she did a total 180. She publicly disavowed the company, said the new leadership had destroyed everything we worked for.
Sounds like a classic blame game. And meanwhile, their personal relationship, that was falling apart too, right?
Big time.
Yeah.
Well, Ashley was pregnant. She started having all these health problems like nausea, chest pains, really bad stomach pains. And this is where things take a really strange turn.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happened?
Ashley sent a hair sample to a lab, and the results, well, they showed high levels of heavy metals. She thought she was being poisoned.
Poisoned? Who did she think was doing it?
She suspected Doug. She even thought his morning tea ritual might be, how he was doing it.
Hold on, are we talking full-on poisoning here?
That's what she believed. But it's worth noting that this same lab was involved in the whole Brittany Murphy poisoning case.
Oh, right. The one that turned out to be not what it seemed.
Exactly. So it does make you wonder, was Ashley genuinely afraid for her life? Or was this, like, paranoia and distrust taking over?
It's hard to tell at this point, but it definitely adds another layer of complexity.
It sure does. And it gets even weirder. Ashley became convinced that Doug was somehow responsible for the death of his first wife, Renee.
Whoa, she was going there.
She even confronted Doug's daughter, Eva, with her theories.
Oh, man. Can you imagine losing your mom and then your stepmom accuses your dad of her murder?
It's a lot to process, and all this was happening while they were supposed to be this loving family.
It sounds like a powder keg ready to blow.
It was. And yet, somehow, Ashley and Doug, they reconciled. They even went to couples therapy, trying to make it work.
It's really common in abusive relationships, this kind of back and forth. Victims often feel trapped. They hope things will change.
But their reconciliation was short-lived.
Hmm.
Doug found out Ashley was having an affair, who even hired a private investigator.
So the trust was pretty much gone by then.
Oh, yeah. And just when you think it can't get any messier, they decide to move to Maryland. Ashley's idea, she wanted a fresh start. But even Doug's own lawyer warned him about her motives. He thought she might be trying to gain some advantage in their custody battle by moving to a new state.
So everyone around them is seeing red flags.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
But Doug was determined to make it work, at least for their daughter's sake. And tragically, it was during this move to Maryland that things went very, very wrong. The day before they were supposed to leave, they had a huge fight. Ashley made a frantic 911 call, and Doug, he was found dead, shot.
This is where the story takes its darkest turn, and this is where we have to stop for now.
But we'll be back to explore what happened that day, the evidence, and Ashley's claims of self-defense.
Make sure you join us for part 2 of this deep dive. There's still so much to uncover.
Last time we left off with this volatile relationship on the verge of a fresh start. They were moving to Maryland, a turning point, or so they thought.
Yeah, it felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know? All this tension building, and then bang, the shooting.
So let's get into what happened that day. The police reports say 4 shots were fired.
Yeah.
From a .45 caliber handgun. Doug was hit twice.
Twice.
Once in the leg and the fatal one in the chest.
And what about signs of a struggle? Was there anything like that?
Not really. The scene, it looked like there wasn't a physical fight before the shooting.
And Ashley, did she have any injuries?
Just a small scratch on her side. But later on, they figured out it was from her bumping into a box the day before, not from a fight with Doug.
So that kind of throws a wrench into things, right? Because her claim was self-defense. But the evidence, well, it doesn't seem to match up.
The prosecution definitely thought so. They were saying this wasn't self-defense, it was premeditated. That the way Doug was shot, it meant he wasn't facing Ashley when it happened.
So what did Ashley's defense team say to that?
They came back with a whole different story. They wanted the charges dropped. Their argument was that Doug, well, he had a history of being really volatile. They said he was controlling, intimidating, and that he could fly off the handle really easily.
Trying to paint him as the aggressor?
Yeah. And they had witnesses to back them up. Doug's own cousin, Tommy.
Yeah.
And even his daughter, Eva. They both testified about his anger issues.
Wow. Even his own daughter.
She said he'd punch holes in the walls, fire his gun into the ceiling during arguments.
So they're saying he had a pattern of this kind of behavior.
Right. But here's the thing. There's no proof that he ever physically hurt Ashley directly.
But the defense was saying that this whole climate of intimidation, of psychological use, that's what made her fear for her life.
Exactly. That on that day, she truly believed she was in danger. And to make their case even stronger, they brought in some expert witnesses.
Yeah.
A domestic violence expert and the couple's marriage counselor.
Oh, interesting. What did they have to say?
Well, they both testified about, this cycle of abuse, how it usually starts with tension building, then there's a blow up, and then there's this honeymoon phase where the abuser apologizes, promises to change, and then the whole cycle just starts over again.
It's a pretty classic pattern, unfortunately.
Sadly, yeah. And the experts, they said Ashley's experience, it fit right in. They described Doug as domineering, controlling, even manipulative. They said he used his faith as a way to control her.
So you've got these two very different versions of what happened. Was it cold-blooded murder? Or was it a woman pushed to her breaking point?
And in the middle of all this, you've got Ashley's own testimony.
And what did she have to say?
Well, she went into a lot of detail about her relationship with Doug. She described him as emotionally volatile, prone to these fits of rage. She said he was physically intimidating.
Did she claim that he, actually hit her?
She said he threatened her, hurt their pets, even locked her in a closet during arguments.
So she's painting this really dark picture of their life together.
Yeah. And then, to really drive her point home, she agreed to do something pretty unusual. She reenacted the shooting, right there in the courtroom.
Whoa, seriously?
She showed everyone how Doug allegedly lunged at her and how she had to fire the gun to protect herself.
That must have been dramatic.
It was. And, people had all sorts of reactions. Some thought it was a real, raw expression of what she'd been through. Others thought it was all an act.
Trying to sway the jury.
Exactly. The jury, they had to weigh all the evidence, the forensic stuff, the witness statements, Ashley's testimony, and then they had to decide, was she justified in shooting Doug?
Not an easy decision to make.
Nope. And in the end, they found Ashley guilty, but not of second-degree murder like the original charge. It was manslaughter with a firearm.
A lesser charge then, but still serious consequences.
Definitely. She could get up to 30 years in prison. Her sentencing isn't until later, but whatever happens, this whole thing, it's left a lot of people hurting.
It's a tragedy all around.
Yeah. We've got a young woman who might spend decades behind bars, a daughter who's lost both her parents, and everyone's left trying to make sense of it all, trying to figure out, was justice served?
It's a question that stays with you, doesn't it?
It does. And we'll dig into that question even more when we come back for the final part of our deep dive. So we spent all this time digging into this story, the whirlwind romance, the accusations, the ballet company, and then that awful shooting.
Yeah, it's one of those cases you just, you can't shake off, can you?
It really gets you thinking. I mean, at first glance, you might say, okay, woman shoots husband, open and shut. But when you really get into it, it's like this whole other world opens up.
Right, the abuse allegations, the manipulation, that whole custody battle.
It makes you realize just how complicated these situations can be. And the law, well, it's supposed to protect victims' right. Yeah. But how do you apply it when it's not always clear who the victim is?
That's what makes this case, the Ashley Benfield case, so fascinating. It's like it shines a spotlight on those gray areas of the law, especially when it comes to self-defense.
Exactly, like with the Stand Your Ground law. It's supposed to protect people who are in immediate danger, but what if the threat isn't physical? What if it's more emotional or psychological?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that a lot of people were grappling with during Ashley's trial.
People were split right down the middle. Some were convinced she was this manipulative killer who was playing the system. And others, they were just as sure that she was a victim who finally snapped.
And the verdict, manslaughter with a firearm, it kind of reflects that, doesn't it? Like the jury couldn't completely agree one way or the other.
It's like they were saying, yes, she took a life, but there were reasons. And, this case, it's a really stark reminder that domestic violence, it doesn't always look the same. It can be hidden behind closed doors.
Absolutely. And it leaves these deep scars. We need to be more aware of the signs, listen to survivors, believe them. And we need a system that understands just how complex these situations are.
It's on all of us.
Right.
We can't turn away from these stories no matter how hard they are to hear.
I think what this case really teaches us is sometimes there aren't easy answers. Sometimes the truth is messy.
That's a good point. And I think it's something for all of us to think about as we move forward. What resonated with you in this case? What questions are still swirling around in your head? And how can we all work together to prevent these tragedies from happening in the first place?
Those are the important questions.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep searching for the truth, keep questioning everything, and keep those conversations going.